Let's pray. Dear Lord, as I come to you this morning, Lord, I want to thank you for being merciful to me, Lord, and answering prayers, Lord. I thank you for that. And Lord, I have one prayer this morning that what I do here this morning would glorify you, Lord, and you alone. Lord, you know how my mind works, Lord, and how I forget things. And Lord, I can open my mouth sometimes and forget what I was going to say. Lord, I pray that don't happen here this morning, Lord, but only if it's something I shouldn't say. Lord, I just pray you be with me this morning as I read your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Y'all can be seated. I'm gonna start out in Psalm 103, and I want to read the whole psalm. You know, it's a psalm of David, what Brother Daniel's going to preach on this morning. Is a psalm of David, and David was a man after God's own heart. But David was a wicked man, just like we are. But he was able to find forgiveness. And in Psalm 103, it starts out, it says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. Who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfieth thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles. The Lord executeth righteousness and judgment for all the oppressed, for all that are oppressed. He made known his ways unto Moses, his acts unto the children of Israel. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and plenteous in mercy." Now, those verses that I just read was a mouthful. I'm sure glad that God is slow to anger. If he was like me, I can fly off the handle in a heartbeat. And most of the time I wish I hadn't. He will not always chide, neither will he keep his anger forever. He hath not dealt with us after our sins, thank God, nor rewarded us according to our iniquities. For as the heaven is high above the earth, so great is his mercy toward them that fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far hath he removed our transgressions from us. Now think about that. But something had to happen for him to do that. And that something was a king. A king had to hang on a tree for every one of us. King Jesus, he had to suffer in our place. And the old song, who am I that a king would bleed and die for? Who are we that a king would bleed and die for? I know I'm so wicked, I scare my own self sometimes. But just to know that God knew that I needed him and sent his own son. I didn't know what I was going to say. I don't never know what I'm going to say when I get up here because I'm not really educated. I went to 12 years to school and they learned me how to stand in line. And that's about all you get from, and I was a public school. That's one of the most wickedest places in the world. But thank God, he was merciful with me there too. He gave me a wife that didn't want to send her children to a public school. I don't even know where I'm at, but God does. Thank you, Lord. Like as a father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him. For he knoweth our frame, he remembereth that we are dust. As for a man, his days are as grass, as the flower of the field, so he flourisheth. For the wind passeth over it, and it is gone, and the place thereof shall know it no more. And this is a big verse. But the mercy of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting upon them that fear him, upon the righteous, and his righteousness unto his children's children. To such as keep his covenant, and to those that remember his commandments to do them. The Lord hath prepared his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom ruleth over all the earth. And when you look at the world today, ain't you glad that God's still a ruling? I mean, that bunch of wicked people that think they're in control, they ain't in control of nothing. But they want you to think they are. Bless ye the Lord, all his hosts, ye ministers of his that do his pleasure. Bless the Lord, all his works and all places of his dominion. And that's everywhere. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Now in Isaiah 43 and verse 25 it says, even I am he that blotteth out thy transgressions for mine own sake, and will not remember thy sins. Now I don't understand that, but I'm glad he done it. He done it for his own sake. But it sure helps me a lot. And then in Isaiah 49, I won't turn to it, but he said that this was way before it happened. He said that now, Lord, bring it to my remembrance. He said a woman may forget their sucking child, and today we can understand that because a lot of women do, but a good mama don't. But said, I won't forget you because I've engraved you upon the palms of my hands. Said, thy walls are continually before me, and thy walls he's watching everything that we do. That's like a fenced wall around us. And that's a pretty safe place to be. And I don't know if I ought to say this or not, but I got a testimony this morning. I'm just no baby. I love you, James. save my son. And I told Jay, I don't think I told him, I may have told somebody else, I don't know. But the night he saved James, he woke me up. And I couldn't sleep. James, I was praying for you. And all my children, I didn't know about this. But you know, the Bible tells us that when we don't know what to pray for, that He'll. And I'm glad He does, because I don't ever know what to pray for. He'll intercede. And I just said, Lord, save my son and my grandchildren, and I'd name them all. But He had me up for you, so. God is good. If y'all don't know Him, if there's anybody out there under the sound of my voice that don't know Him, you're missing something. We'll have problems, but we got somebody who'll help us tote them, or tote them, and tote us with them. Thank you.
We're going to worship the Lord now with a song that is new for many of us. We've had a few folks practicing this song, so hopefully we can carry the tune. I'm convinced as you worship the Lord with this song, give consideration to where you were at with the Lord, or where you are at now with the Lord. This song is very much autobiographical for me, and I am convinced that anyone who is in Christ, this song is very much autobiographical for you also. So let's worship the Lord by crying out to Him and saying, "All I have is Christ."
Joy and life had led me to the grave.
One day, we will all be before the throne of God above. And on that day, what will our hope be in? Will it be in our trophies? Will it be in our baseball card collection? Will it be in our seashell collection? Will it be in our bank account? Will it be in our retirement account? Or will it simply be, all I have is Christ? So let's sing 187, Before the Throne of God Above. Hallelujah.
We're going to be reading in Psalm 25, verses 6 through 7. Remember, O Lord, thy tender mercies and thy loving kindness, for they have been ever of old. Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions according to thy mercy. Remember thou me for thy goodness' sake, O Lord.
Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, so often we do not like to think of the dark times in our lives, but Father, I know that there are those, Father, who are there now, Father, within our church who are struggling. I'm thankful for the snapshot we have here of David's soul that you've given to us in your word. I pray, Father, that it would encourage us, convict us, strengthen us, sustain us, but most of all, that your word would cause all of us to run to Jesus Christ. It's in his name I pray. Amen. You may be seated. As we've been going through Psalm 25, as we've looked previously, we don't exactly know what the context is. All we know is that David is older, and this is later in life, because as we're going to see today, he speaks of the sins of his youth. And we don't know exactly what's happening, but there is some sort of problem going on in his life. It would appear that there is individuals coming after him, because he speaks in verse 2 of enemies, and how he wants to be delivered from his enemies. Some have speculated this is during the time of Absalom, his son's rebellion, when his son tried to take the kingdom from David. We don't know exactly what is going on here, other than David is really struggling in his walk with the Lord. And this psalm gives us a remarkable insight into what it means to be a man after God's own heart. And what that means is to be someone who is constantly pursuing the Lord, even in the midst of pain, suffering, and difficulty. So as we look here in verse 6 and 7, David cries out to the Lord and he says, remember. He says, remember, O Lord, your tender mercies. That could also be translated as your compassion or your pity. And you can see David kind of looking back on his life and remembering all of the love and compassion and mercy and pity that God has demonstrated to him throughout his entire life. If we were to look at David's life, it is a life that is just remarkably filled with God's compassion on this young boy that his own dad didn't even call to be considered to be king. This boy that's keeping the sheep, the boy that the entire army laughs at, the boy that nobody thinks is going to kill Goliath, the boy that gets, eventually becomes the king's son-in-law, the boy that gets chased by his father-in-law and tries to kill him numerous times. You look at David's life and you look back on all of it, and what you see is just God's hand of compassion and love for David. When other people forsook David, when other people did not care about David, when other people hated David, pursued David, tried to destroy David, what you see across David's life is God always being there, always loving him, always having compassion. Now, if you're here this morning and you're a Christian, you can probably look back on your life and see the same thing. Okay, I was reminded as I was studying this week of my grandma. My grandma loved that Footprints poem, the one about how there's two sets of footprints and look back, and there's the one set of footprints in the dark time of my life, and that's when God carried me. I think she had 3 copies of that poem just in her bathroom. It was everywhere, all over her whole house. When she passed and we were cleaning out her house, it was everywhere. She absolutely loved that poem. And as a Christian, the older you get, the more you understand it, because we look back on our lives and we see the pain and the suffering, the loss, the grief, and yet we see that God's hand was there. How many of you can look back on your life at times of difficulty, types of grief, type of pain, suffering, hurt, and when you look back and you see that God had wrapped his loving arms around you in the midst of that grief, and he's the one that sustained you in the midst of that loss. As you went through those difficulties, you can look back and you're reminded of Psalm 23 that, yeah, I went through the valley, but you were with me. You were with me the whole time. That's what David's doing. He's looking back and he's going, man, God, look at that. When the lion came, when the bear came, man, you just wrapped your arms around me. You had pity. You had compassion on me. You showed mercy to me. When I went out to fight Goliath, God, what was I thinking? But you spared my life. When Saul threw the spear at me, man, it was just like your hand just grabbed the spear and moved it out of the way so it wouldn't kill me. Man, as I ran from Saul, you just wrapped your arms around me, comforted me. And we have so much of that in the Psalms. So much of him, don't forget all the Lord's benefits to me. Praise the Lord. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Some of what Harold read this morning of David just blessing the Lord and praising the Lord. But you got to remember, David's kind of saying it this way. God, you remember all those times when you loved me? Past tense. You remember all those times when you picked me up and carried me? Be kind of nice if you did it today, because David doesn't feel any of that today. As he's writing Psalm 25, he doesn't feel God's mercy. He doesn't feel God's compassion. He doesn't feel God's love. I'm sure many of you have gone through maybe times of grief where you've lost a loved one. You look back and you could just see God just wrapping His arms around you and healing you. David's like, yeah, that'd be nice, Lord, because now I feel like I've been left out in the cold. I feel as if you've turned your back on me. Do you remember how you used to love me, God? How you used to comfort me? Used to sustain me? Used to show compassion on me? Used to show pity on me? You see, David doesn't feel any of God's compassion right now. He doesn't feel any of it. He then continues and says, and your loving kindness. Like as he looks at this idea of God's loving kindness, the idea is you remember, God, when you were so kind to me. I mean, look back on David's life. I mean, he's the little shrimp of a little brother, and he's the one that gets to be anointed king. I mean, that's just nothing but God's kindness. I mean, he's the little shepherd who kills Goliath and becomes a national hero. I mean, that's just God's kindness. I mean, he's the king's son-in-law way down the line, and he gets to become king. You look at David's life, and it is just one blessing after another, one kindness after another. It's not that God just brought him and saved him from Saul. He took him, saved him from Saul, put him on the throne, and surrounded him with the greatest warriors the world's ever seen. You look at David's life, and David looks back and goes, man, look at God's grace in my life. Look at your kindness. You know, I prayed for one thing and you gave me 10,000. I asked you to deliver me once and you didn't just deliver me, you made me king. Like I asked for you to spare me and you didn't just spare me, you poured out all these extra blessings. Your kindness, your love, your mercy, your grace was so evident. You remember that, right, God? You remember how you used to answer my prayers? You remember how I'd pray for one thing and you give me a dozen, and now I pray for one thing and you take it away? So you see, that's where David's at right now. Guys, I don't know how many of y'all have ever felt this way, but I know many times in my life, and every Christian that I've ever talked to encounters times in their lives where they can look back and see God's compassion. They can look back and see God's kindness. They can look back and see God's love. They can look back and see how God answered prayer. But right now, it feels like everything I pray for, God takes away from me. It doesn't seem like God's giving me anything. All it seems like He's doing is taking things from me. I don't feel His love. I don't feel His compassion. If anything, I feel like He's left me out in the cold and made it rain on me. Have you ever felt that way? So has David, the man after God's own heart. He feels abandoned by God. He feels if God has taken all of His love and compassion and kindness and mercy and just taken it from David. As Christians, there are times that we're going to feel this way. But let's keep reading. He says, for they've been ever of old. In other words, he knows this is God's character. He knows God's character. He knows the history of God, not just in David's life, but he knows that this is the way that God has always been. God has always been kind. God has always been compassionate. God has always showed this kindness to Adam, to Enoch, to Noah, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to Judah, to Joseph, to Moses. I mean, he knows all of these stories. And he knows that God has always been kind and compassionate and merciful and loving and gracious. And there's kind of this little jab at God, except for me right now. That's the way you treat Abraham, but it's not the way you treat me. That's the way you treated Moses, but apparently you've changed and you don't treat me that way now. That's the way David feels. He knows all of God's goodness. He's seen it all. He can recite all the history of his people. He can tell you about all the things. He can tell you of Samuel as a little boy in the temple. He can tell you about Hannah wanted a baby and she cried out and God gave her Samuel and gave her multiple kids after that. He can tell you all of those stories about God's goodness and kindness and faithfulness to everybody else. And even God's kindness and goodness in David's life up until right about now. And he's like, God, have you forgotten? Like, remember your goodness, remember your kindness. Then verse 7, he says, remember not. In other words, please forget the sins of my youth. You know, what David is not saying is that he's sinless now. He's not saying that. In fact, he's going to, in verse 11, ask for God to pardon his sin because he knows it's great. But have you ever been in a really tough spot and you feel like God has just withdrawn his hand from you, turned his back on you, shut up the heavens, refused to answer your prayers? What do? Man, you begin to start doing, what did I do to deserve this? What sin did I commit that would bring this on me? And I don't know about you, but I look back, I mean, I know I'm young and dumb, but like I look back to when I was really young and dumb, and I'm like, oh my goodness. Yeah, that's why. That's why. Sure enough. You know, as I was reading this, I was reminded of my dad. I'll tell you a little bit of story about my dad. My dad was a brilliant man and extremely athletic. Those of y'all who knew him before he passed probably would not know this. My dad scored, at the time when he was a senior in high school, the highest SAT score in his high school's history. Okay? Very smart. He was offered 7 full-ride scholarships to play basketball. Ended up going to a kind of prestigious private college called the Center College of Kentucky to major in biochemistry and molecular genetics. Very smart guy. Very prestigious school, playing basketball, everything's going great. And then when my dad was 20 years old, he passed blood in his urine and went to the doctor to get that checked up. And the nurse was there just taking his blood pressure routinely, all that type of stuff. And she took his blood pressure again and took it again. And she called the doctor. And my dad was kind of confused. And she told the doctor, he doesn't have a bottom number. And the doctor said, no, that's impossible. Everyone has a bottom number. And so he cranked up the blood pressure cuff to where my dad felt like his arm was going to break out. And that's because my dad's blood pressure, the bottom number was 140. And that's what the nurse was hearing when she was taking his blood pressure. His blood pressure was like 240 over 140, which, by the way, is way past stroke level. So they told him immediately, lay down, don't move. Like you could literally die if you move. So then they started doing tests on my dad. And again, 20 years old, whole life ahead of him, playing college basketball. And they diagnosed him with polycystic kidney disease, which is a disease I have. And this is what they told him at 20 years old. You will be dead by the time you are 30. Do not get married. And do not have children, because all of your children, there's a 50% chance every one of your kids will have it. And that was the only thing the doctors got right. Half of my brothers and sisters had the same disease. My dad went from playing college basketball to one day he jogged literally across the street less than 10 yards and passed blood because it was too much stress on his body. Okay? From being the best shape of his life to literally can't jog across the street in the rain. You know how devastating that is? And so he told me, he said, I went and locked myself, and this is when my dad had given his life to the Lord many years before. He was sharing the gospel in his fraternity. He was volunteering with Campus Crusade. I mean, he was doing all of these things. He was sold out to the Lord when all this happened to him. And so he said, I went into my room, and I confessed every sin I'd ever did. And he said, and then I started confessing sins I hadn't even committed. Because there was such a desperation to feel like God had just left you while you're serving Him and pouring your life into His service. You know, I don't know about you, but I've been in similar situations where you're like, Lord, what sin have I not confessed? What thing have I not done? In fact, you'll find David throughout the Psalm saying, Lord, search me, try me, see if there's some wicked way in me. I mean, point out if is there a presumptuous sin in my life? Is there some sin that I cannot see? And that's the way David is. He's like, God, I don't know what I did, but please forgive me. I don't know what I did. I don't know what sin I've done to deserve all these things. But please, can you forget it? Can you forgive me? He says, notice this. He says, remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. And then he gives the reason, according to your mercy. He doesn't come the way I would come. Lord, don't you realize all the stuff I've done for you? Don't you realize all the things that I could have done and I didn't do because of you? Don't you see how I've dedicated my life to serving you? He doesn't do that. He says, I just want you to be merciful to me. For what reason? For your goodness. Not because of any goodness that David brings to the table, but he wants God to be glorified and how he delivers David from his predicament. Notice the faith that he still has when he feels like God's back has been turned on him, when he feels like God has abandoned him, when he feels like God has withdrawn all kindness and all compassion and all love and all mercy, and even when he feels like God is bringing up every little thing he's ever done and punishing him for every sin he's ever committed. At the end of the day, he wants God to be merciful to him so that everyone would see how good God is, not how good David is. And this is not the main point of the message, but let me just put it this way. If you tell any Bible story where someone is the hero other than Jesus Christ, you need to repent. We have way too often told our kids about how David killed Goliath, not how God delivered David from Goliath. We tell the story about how Noah built the ark, not how God delivered Noah. You see, David's prayer is not that whatever the situation is, whether this is Absalom or some other situation, his prayer is not that we, 3,000 years later, would look back and go, God did that for David because David was a man after God's own heart. His prayer is that we would look back and say, the reason David died in peace was because of God's goodness to David. He wants God to be glorified through this. You know, it's a very simple passage of Scripture to explain. It doesn't really require a tremendous amount of knowledge to read this, and it really doesn't require much experience in the Christian life to relate to this. But there are a lot of truths that we need to glean from this that really apply to our lives today. The first is, in the Christian life, you are not always going to feel like God loves you. The Christian life is walked by faith, not by the way you feel. Okay, you want to talk about God's compassion, kindness, closeness, mercy, goodness that David does not feel? David is so close to God, so filled with the Spirit of God, that he is under inspiration writing Holy Scripture, and he doesn't feel close to God at all. God is so present in David's life that he is writing the Bible, yet David feels like God has turned his back on him. You see, that's part of our little amnesia, okay? When we look back on our Christian life, you use the whole footprint poems, oh, that's when God carried me. You see that now, but if you were to go back to you back then, you didn't feel it then. How many of us look back, okay, and go, man, look how God answered my prayers? You didn't feel that God was answering those prayers when you were praying them. The only reason you know that God was answering your prayers is because you're looking back, not in the present reality. We have a tendency to look back on our lives and see God's hand everywhere, then come present day and not see God's hand anywhere. And one of the things we need to understand is that the Christian life is not based on how you feel. God's covenant promises are not based upon you and how you feel in the moment. They're based upon Him and His character that never fails and never changes. But you need to understand you are going to feel like God has abandoned you. That is a feeling that is very real in the Christian life. You are going to feel like God has shut the heavens and refused to answer your prayers. You are going to feel like God has turned His back on you and is ignoring you. You are going to feel like God is trying to make you hurt more than anything else. I don't know about you. I've felt that way before. My favorite song of all time is I Ask the Lord That I Might Grow. Because in it says, yea, even with His own hand He seemed to aggravate my woe. In other words, what Newton is saying in that song is I felt like God Himself was crushing me on purpose. And the reason I love that song is because that's my life. Because so many times in my life, I relate to this. God, how come you answered my prayer 2 weeks ago, but not today? God, how come you everything was so peachy in my life 3 years ago, but for some reason the last 3 months, you just forgot about me? You see, that's the way David is. And that's part of the normal Christian experience. I mean, even Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So the first thing we need to get from this is the Christian life is not based upon how you feel. Okay? The next thing I would add to that is sometimes the closer you are to God, the farther you feel away from Him. Again, remember, David's under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit when he writes this. You know, I remember, I was thinking this past week as I was studying, the first couple times I fasted, and my thoughts on fasting versus the reality of fasting. My thought was, the longer you fast, the more like the Shekinah glory that was on Moses shines from your face, the more all of your prayers get immediately answered. You just pretty much walk on water through life. Okay, that's kind of the way I thought fasting was. And the first couple times I fasted, the opposite happened. I felt like God answered fewer of my prayers. I felt farther from God. I felt more sinful than I'd ever felt. And so my solution was I just didn't fast long enough. And so I fasted even longer. And you know what I found? The more you fast, the farther away God feels. It's true. And then I began to realize, if I'd actually read the Bible, which I would suggest, what happened to Jesus after 40 days of fasting? That's when Satan attacked him the most. You know, and we somehow think that if I fast for 40 days, then I am just going to feel God's presence. No, you may not. But you see, how close you are to God is not determined on how you feel. There are many people who feel that they are right with God and are not. There are many people who feel they are close to God and they have never been farther away. And there are many people who are struggling in their walk with Jesus Christ who have never been closer to Him. It's such an important thing. So often as a pastor, I'm counseling people and they're like, I just feel like, God's abandoned me and all of those things, and I don't even know if I'm a Christian anymore. And I'm like, guys, go read the Bible. That's part of Christian experience. But can I tell you something too? I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself here. But when David 10 years later, looks back on Psalm 25, you know what he's going to see? That God was right there with him in the midst of his pain and suffering. And that's one of the things of walking by faith, is learning to see what you can't see. I can look back on my life 10 years ago and say, man, there's God right there. But you know what I have a hard time seeing? God right now. I do. You see, it's easy when God has answered your prayer to look back and go, oh, that's why God waited 2 days to answer my prayer. But you know how long 2 days is for God to answer a prayer when you need it right now? Oh, God hates you, and God despises you, and God's abandoned you to suffer miserably for 48 hours. That's the way we feel right now. And one of the things we learn from Psalm 25 is God has not left or forsaken his people. Even though you may feel that way, God's promises are still true. God is being compassionate, merciful, and kind to you even when you do not feel it. You see, his ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. His timetable isn't our timetable. And what he is doing in our lives is far beyond what we could ever ask or think. What he is doing, he tells us, has not even entered into the mind of man. What God has prepared for those who love us. He's conforming you to the image of Christ in ways you don't even know that you need to be conformed. He is working fruit in your life that you did not even realize you weren't bearing. He is bringing things to the surface that you did not even realize were there, because he is good and he loves you. He will not leave or forsake his own children, even though you may feel like he has. One of the other things that I see here in this passage of Scripture is not all suffering is caused by sin. Read the book of Job. I'm going to tell you this right now, and I'm not trying to bash any preacher, but any preacher who preaches on the sin of Job, you should not listen to that sermon. Job suffered because God was glorified in Job's suffering. And I cannot tell you how or why. I can just tell you, according to God himself, Job did nothing to deserve his suffering. And Job suffered a lot. You just think your suffering's bad? You know, sometimes we do our comparative suffering, you know, like, well, yeah, you suffered a little bit, but I suffered a lot. Okay? Job lost all of his servants. We forget this. All of his household servants died except like 5. Can you imagine all of your friends and coworkers dying in one day? But we don't even look at that. You know why? Because he buried 10 children in the same day. I don't know about you, but my losses don't compare. You say, well, it's okay because he had all this money. No, financial suffering as well. But he still had his health. Nope. He still had a great relationship with his wife. Nope. He had wonderful friends. Nope. Nothing. All the things that you complain about, he got it all in one day. Every single thing. And yet it was not because of anything he had done. We need to understand that we have been so inundated with the idea that God operates on karma that we have become like Job's friends. And so the moment calamity hits, we become going, okay, what sin did I not do? What sin did I not do? Now, there's another lesson that we can learn here, though, and that is that there is problems in our lives that are caused by sin. A substantial amount of David's problems when he was older was reaping what he sowed. The sin with Bathsheba lasted for decades of ramifications in David's life. It did. Okay? We know from 1 Corinthians chapter 11 that sometimes people get sick and die because of sin. We know from James chapter 5 that sometimes sickness is caused by sin. Okay? And so we see here, one, that not all problems in our lives are caused by sin, but when problems arise in our life, we need to be like David and search our hearts and lay our hearts before the Lord to see if there is a sin that is bringing about the problems in our lives. I was meeting with a pastor one time, and it was one of those where, there was like a jealousy coming in me because just all the blessings that God had poured out in his life and ministry. And I was just kind of like, God, why didn't you do that for me? Type thing. And it was like, God was like, because if I did it, your ego would have destroyed you. It's like, yeah, you got a point there, Lord. Because you see, we have a tendency not to look at those things, not to see our pride, our sin, our selfishness. Many times the reason you're having relationship issues is because the person you see in the mirror every day. Sometimes the reason you have financial issues is because the person who has the credit card. And it's you. Sometimes you have health issues because you sit on the couch and don't exercise. Sometimes our problems are self-inflicted. And part of what we must do as Christians is come before the Lord and say, Lord, teach me, show me, reveal things to me. I know what I'm saying here is very sensitive, and I'm not trying to step on people's toes, but sometimes your marriage problems are caused by yourself. Sometimes the relationship with your kids is destroyed because of the way you are as a parent. And one of the surefire ways to know that's the case is if you're sitting there going, no, it can't be the case. Because that means you're blinded by your pride. When difficulties come into our life, we need to come and lay our lives before the Lord and say, Lord, forgive me. Is there some sin that I've done to deserve this? But one of the other things we see in this, and this is what I hope you get through all of Psalm 25, is where does David go when he has problems? He always goes to the Lord. When things are going well in David's life, what does he do? He grabs his harp and he sings a song of praise. When things are going bad in his life, what does David do? He grabs his harp and he sings a song of woe, crying out to the Lord. He runs to God no matter what is going on in his life. There's something we skip over in the book of Acts 17 when Paul is speaking at Mars Hill. You know what he says? He says that God has set the bounds of our habitations. In other words, every single thing in your life, God has orchestrated for one purpose. Everything. Everything good, everything bad, everything wonderful, every blessing, every curse, every struggle, everything God has worked about in your life for one purpose. And what does Paul tell us it is? That we might seek Him. Everything God has done in your life is God tapping you on the shoulder. Hey, I did that. I did that. I gave you that. Okay? Hey, going the wrong way. Going the wrong way. I wouldn't do that if I was you. Everything in your life is that. Everything is God saying, look to me, look to me, look to me, look to me. And that's one of the things you see from David as a man after God's own heart. It doesn't matter if David's doing great or if David's doing horrible. You will always find David doing the exact same thing, and that is seeking the Lord. And this is perhaps one of the greatest lessons you can learn from this, is I do not need to know or have to know everything going on in your life. And there's a bunch of people here, and every single one of you has different problems and different blessings. Some of you are the most excited you've ever been, and some of you are the most depressed you've ever been. And I have one answer for every single one of you, and that is run to Jesus Christ. If it is the best your life has ever been, run to Jesus and tell Him thank you. If it is the worst your life has ever been, run to Jesus and tell Him about it. I don't know where we've gotten this idea of where God hates hypocrites in church but loves hypocrites in prayer. Okay? And this is the thing. Like we are like some of the biggest hypocrites in the world as it relates to our relationship with God. We value openness and honesty in face-to-face relationships. And then, this is what we do, okay? Your life's a mess. Everything you prayed for, God hasn't heard your prayers. Every time you pray and fast, it gets worse, not better. And then someone asks you to pray and you go, Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for all of your blessings. You don't feel that way. You're lying. Be honest. That's one of the things I love about David. David comes to God and says, God, remember? Yeah, I don't see that. Remember? Yeah. No, it's not happening, Lord. I don't really feel very loved right now. I don't really feel much kindness. I don't feel much compassion. I'm not really seeing mercy and grace here, God. I've seen it in Noah's life, but hello? You see, we as Christian people have adopted this idea that you can't be honest with God. That you can be angry with God until it comes time to talk with God, and then you have to act like He doesn't know you're angry. If you are mad at God, He already knows. I don't know if you're aware of this, but He knows all of your thoughts and the intents of your heart. And if you're mad at Him, maybe you should tell Him. Go to Him. You know, we talk about, hey, if you got something against your brother, you need to go talk to him. If you got something against God, maybe you should go talk to Him. God's big enough to handle it. God's not going to have a mental breakdown if you tell Him, God, I'm kind of upset right now. Okay? Well, you know, I went through all those things and I never questioned God. Jesus questioned God. My God, why? If you have questions, why are you stewing in them with people who can't give you answers? If you want to know why God did something in your life, go ask Him. I can't tell you. Go ask Him. Be honest with Him. Be open with Him. Tell Him about your struggles. Tell Him about the way you feel. He knows it. Go to Him. See, the Lord has promised that He's not going to cast out anyone who comes to Him. In fact, what you may find is the comfort you needed all along. You know what I found is when I get mad at God, and I do, I'm just being honest, and God doesn't seem to be answering my prayers, and I kind of stew in it, and I kind of just throw up the Lord bless my family today, and kind of, then finally I go, you know what, I'm just going to let God have it. And so I set aside time in my schedule to, I normally go out in the cemetery. So if you ever see somebody walking around the cemetery like yelling and screaming, that's me. That's the way I pray. So I'll go out in the cemetery and I'll just let God have it. And like by the end of it, I'm just kind of like, God, you are so good. Thank you. I feel your love and compassion for me now. And then I go back about my life. And then sometimes within an hour, I'm back out there. But that's part of the Christian life. Go to Jesus. If you're struggling, go to Him. If you're hurting, go to Him. If you're grieving, go to Him. If you don't know what to do, go to Him. If everything's wonderful in your life, go tell Him thank you. Give Him praise. Seek the Lord. But the last thing that we see here is in all of this, David is concerned about God's reputation, not his own. I remember years ago doing a Bible study, and it was on overcoming sin. And the very first lesson was, why do you want to overcome your sin? And I remember going, well, that's a dumb question, because I love Jesus and don't want to sin. Duh. But then it really began to delve into the heart. Do you want God to free you from your sin so that you might appear to be godly in front of others? Do you want God to free you from your sin so that you don't have problems anymore? Or do you want God to come through so that everyone else sees how good God is? And that really is a lesson that every single one of us need to ask this morning. You're struggling. Okay? Well, what are you going to do if God takes care of your struggle? So many times we struggle and we try to act like we don't struggle because we want to appear to be the one who's got it all together. And so if God was to answer our prayers and we weren't struggling anymore, no one would ever give God glory because we were never honest enough to say we were struggling. That's one of the things I love about the Bible. You got Peter's denial of Christ. Okay, you got John Mark turning around and running back home. I mean, you got David's adultery. You got Moses killing the Egyptian and striking the rock, and all of their sins are on full display. You know why? So that God would get the glory, not man. Why do you want God to comfort you? Why do you want God to provide for you? Why do you want God to heal you? Why do you want God to fix your marriage? Why do you want God to save your children? Why do you want God to save you? For you? Or so that everyone might see how good God is? If God was to answer every single one of your prayers right now, would you be grabbing a harp and singing a song? Would you be telling others of God's goodness? You see, David has recorded his own struggles so that we might seek God and give him the glory. What I've been speaking about today is largely directed at believers. If you're a Christian, you understand the struggle that David has because you felt this way as well. But if you're not a believer, I want to tell you of Jesus Christ and his love for sinners. How he died on the cross to bear our sins. And he rose again from the dead to impart to us a new life. And how he has promised to never leave us. Notice he didn't say, I promise you'll never feel like I haven't left you. But that he will never leave or forsake us. And that the work he has begun, he will finish. That he will lose none of his own. That he will carry us safely home. If you are burdened this morning and you are struggling, Jesus says, come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. If your soul is burdened this morning, if you are burdened with the weight of sin, if you are struggling, come to Jesus Christ. He will forgive you, he will change you, he will empower you, he will transform you. The Apostle Paul was asked one time, what must I do to be saved? And the answer is simple. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you'll be saved.